Commander Zyrol stood at the heart of the Vorkari warship Dominance, gazing at the blue-green world below. His four eyes blinked in calculated sequence, his mind effortlessly processing the streams of data flashing across the holographic display. Earth. The latest, and likely the last, challenge to the might of the Vorkari Imperium. Are the fleets in position? Zyrol's voice was sharp, precise. Yes, Commander, replied strategist Vorin, his secondary arms folded behind his back in the posture of military certainty. Orbital bombardment awaits your command. We anticipate a 97.4% extinction rate within the first planetary cycle. Any survivors will be eradicated through systematic cleansing. Zyrol exhaled slowly. It was all so predictable. The Imperium had conquered over 200 species in its expansion, and never once had an inferior race posed any real challenge. Intelligence had classified humanity as primitive. Their technology was laughably outdated. Their biology was weak, fragile. Yet, an unsettling feeling lingered at the back of Zyrol's mind. Any irregularities in our assessments? He asked, his tone neutral but expectant. Vorin hesitated. A fraction of a second, but Zyrol caught it. There is one concern, Commander. Vorin gestured, and the display shifted to show combat footage, humanity's previous wars. Their adaptability defies standard models. They do not fight in predictable formations. They refuse surrender, even when logic dictates otherwise. They make use of asymmetric tactics that... Zyrol flicked a claw dismissively. Asymmetry is the strategy of the weak. They cannot outmatch our forces in firepower, technology, or discipline. That is true, Commander, Vorin conceded, his mandibles clicking in agreement, but they have a habit of surviving. Zyrol let out a sharp hiss, the Vorkari equivalent of a chuckle. Let us put that habit to the test. He turned toward the holomap of Earth and issued the order. All ships, begin the purge. With that, the sky over Earth burned. The sky wept fire. Commander Zyrol observed from orbit as streaks of plasma lanced downward, striking the surface of Earth with terrifying precision. The first wave of bombardments had targeted major population centers: New York, Beijing, London, Moscow. Thermal scans confirmed millions dead in seconds. The death toll would rise exponentially as firestorms and shockwaves swept across the landscape. Resistance? Zyrol asked, his voice devoid of concern. Strategist Vorin studied the reports, his mandibles tightening. Their planetary defenses were negligible. We neutralized their satellites within minutes. Their primitive missile systems pose no threat. By all calculations, they should collapse within hours. Zyrol nodded, unsurprised. Every species they had encountered followed the same pattern: shock, panic, surrender. And yet, something was wrong. The battle reports flooding in did not follow standard predictions. Instead of mass confusion, human forces were reorganizing at an unnatural speed. Entire cities had been abandoned before the first plasma volleys struck. Military installations, expected to be easy targets, had been stripped bare, equipment and personnel relocated with eerie efficiency. Civilian broadcasts didn't beg for mercy. They coordinated. Zyrol's primary eyes narrowed. What is this? A new display flickered to life, showing combat footage from a Vorkari ground incursion in what had once been Paris. The streets were empty at first, until human soldiers, operating in scattered fire teams, struck without warning. Explosives, electromagnetic pulses, and sniper fire shattered Vorkari squads in seconds. The aliens had superior armor, superior weapons, but the humans fought with deception, vanishing into underground tunnels, using old sewer systems to flank positions. The reports were worse from North America. The Vorkari had expected an easy ground operation. Instead, they walked into death traps. Supply convoys were hit with precision strikes. Command nodes were bombarded with cyber attacks that disabled shields and shut down targeting systems. Zyrol's secondary claws curled against the control panel. This was not the behavior of a species in its death throes. This was not desperation. This was calculated defiance. A communication officer approached, his posture rigid with uncertainty. Commander, we have intercepted a transmission from the human networks. Play it, Zyrol ordered. The screen flickered to show the face of a human. His uniform marked him as a military leader, but it was his eyes that caught Zyrol's attention, burning with something the Vorkari did not recognize in other species. Defiance. You think this is your war to win? The human said, his voice steady. You think you can burn our cities and break us? You don't understand what you started. We're not fighting for territory. We're not fighting for power. We're fighting because you gave us no other choice. Zyril scoffed. The words of the doomed. The human leaned forward, staring directly into the camera. We don't lose wars, Commander. We adapt. And we learn. Then the transmission cut. Silence filled the war room. Zyril clenched his jaw. The purge was supposed to be simple. But something told him, this was only the beginning. Commander Zyril stood motionless, his 4 eyes locked onto the latest reports. The numbers were impossible. They had to be wrong. Vorkari forces had already lost 32 planetary assault divisions. Warships had been grounded, supply lines severed, and forward bases obliterated. Not by superior technology. Not by overwhelming firepower. But by humans, fragile, primitive humans, who fought like creatures without fear. Zyril's claws tightened against the command console. How? He growled. How does a species with such limited resources continue to resist? Strategist Vorin hesitated before responding. An uncharacteristic uncertainty in his normally precise demeanor. They fight differently than any species we have encountered. They do not break when surrounded. They do not surrender when wounded. They are animals, Zyril snapped. Outmatched and outnumbered. Vorin's mandibles clicked in disagreement. That is precisely what makes them dangerous, Commander. They do not see battle as we do. For us, war is an equation, a logical structure of power and dominance. For them, it is personal. The holoscreen flickered to display intercepted combat footage. Vorkari squads moving through a ruined metropolis, what had once been Chicago, suddenly came under attack. Not from precision laser strikes, but from the shadows themselves. Explosions erupted from underground tunnels, collapsing streets beneath the invaders' feet. Human snipers, hidden in the wreckage of skyscrapers, picked off officers with impossible accuracy. Others used crude but effective suicide charges, detonating themselves to take out entire platoons. Zyril's secondary heart clenched at the sheer irrationality of it. No species had ever fought this way. The concept of self-destruction was unthinkable to the Vorkari. Even when defeated, other races begged for surrender. Even when broken, they submitted. Humans? Humans refused to die quietly. Another alert pulsed across the command console. A new crisis. The cyber attacks. Zyril's claws twitched involuntarily. He had dismissed the initial reports. Humans had no business interfering with Vorkari military networks. Their technology was centuries behind. Their digital systems were primitive. And yet, they had adapted. The display showed the damage. Entire warships drifting lifelessly in orbit, their systems hacked and rendered useless. Tactical nodes feeding the ground forces had been infiltrated, turning the Imperium's own communications against them. False orders had been issued, leading Vorkari soldiers into ambushes laid by human forces. Zyril's own encryption key had been mocked in intercepted transmissions. The humans laughed as they cracked security systems once thought impenetrable. And the worst part? The worst part wasn't the damage to their war effort. It wasn't the losses. It wasn't even the cyber warfare. It was the message the humans sent with every attack. We are still here. Zyril's jaw tightened. They should be broken. Vorin's mandibles twitched. Commander. They do not know how to break. Zyril turned toward the viewport, staring down at the planet that should have been ashes. Instead, it was a storm. For the first time in his long military career, fear slithered into his mind. And for the first time in history, the Vorkari Imperium had made a mistake. They had given humanity a reason to fight. And humanity never stopped fighting. Commander Zyril clenched his mandibles as the battle reports flooded in. The impossible was unfolding before him. What should have been a swift and merciless extermination had turned into a war of attrition, a war the Vorkari were not prepared to fight. The Imperium had never needed endurance. Their wars were brutal but brief, overwhelming lesser species before resistance could even form. But humanity refused to die on schedule. Commander, Strategist Vorin's voice was strained, his posture rigid with uncertainty. New intelligence suggests. He hesitated. Zyril turned his primary eyes toward him. Speak. Vorin's mandibles twitched in agitation. Suggests they have been deceiving us. Zyril froze. Explain. The holographic display flickered, revealing a planetary map. The Vorkari assault strategy had been meticulous, targeting cities, cutting off supply lines, destroying communication hubs. But something was wrong. They let us take the major cities, Vorin said. They wanted us to believe we had crippled them. Meanwhile, they abandoned population centers and funneled their resources elsewhere. We have been fighting in the wrong places. Zyral's eyes widened. The humans had orchestrated their own retreat. That meant... Before he could react, alarms blared. Incoming human strike force. A tactical officer shouted. They've breached high-orbit defenses. The war map updated in real time, and Zyral felt something foreign ripple through him, dread. Human warships, crude but fast, had slipped past the Vorkari blockade. They weren't targeting planetary defenses. They were targeting the fleet itself. A brilliant explosion erupted outside the viewport as a human warhead struck the Tyrannus, one of the Imperium's largest carriers. Shields flickered, then failed. In seconds, the massive warship was torn apart, debris scattering like shattered bone. How did they? Zyral hissed, but he already knew. They had cracked Vorkari encryption. The Imperium's own battle formations had been fed to the enemy. False orders had been injected into their systems. And now, human ships moved with eerie precision, striking weak points with surgical efficiency. On the ground, it was worse. Human forces vanished from their old strongholds and emerged behind enemy lines. Cities the Vorkari thought they controlled were suddenly abandoned, because humans had never intended to hold them. Instead, they had drawn the Vorkari in and then turned the battlefield against them. Supply convoys were ambushed. Communication hubs hacked and rerouted. Even now, Zyral could hear the panicked voices of his officers. Commander, we're losing ground. Orbital command is compromised. Our own ships are firing on each other. They've infiltrated our systems. Zyral's claws tightened. This wasn't war anymore. This was a hunt. And for the first time in Vorkari history, they were the prey. The once mighty Vorkari fleet was in ruins. Commander Zyral stood in the shattered remains of the Dominance's bridge, the vessel drifting helplessly in orbit above Earth. Smoke curled through the air, sparks showering from overloaded consoles. The ship's once impenetrable defenses had been breached by human cyber warfare. Entire warships had gone dark, their own security systems turned against them. The Imperium's greatest fleet, an armada that had crushed entire civilizations, had been reduced to wreckage and retreat. A species they had considered primitive had done the impossible. They had won. Zyral's breathing was ragged, his mind struggling to process the sheer wrongness of it all. The Imperium did not lose. It had never lost. Until now. Commander. Strategist Vorin's voice was barely above a whisper. The homeworld has gone silent. Zyral turned sharply, his primary eyes narrowing. What do you mean, silent? Vorin's mandibles twitched, his posture tense with something Zyral had never seen in him before, fear. We intercepted a human transmission, Vorin said, pulling up the last recorded message from the Vorkari homeworld. The audio was garbled, distorted by some unknown interference. But one phrase came through clear and sharp. We should have never come here. Zyral felt his secondary hearts pound in unison. The Imperium had sent its fleets to burn Earth to ash. Instead, humanity had reversed the tide. They had not stopped at survival. They had not settled for defense. They had gone on the offensive. New data scrolled across the damaged holoscreens. Human ships had jumped into Vorkari space. Small at first, then larger fleets, wave after wave. The homeworld's planetary defenses had been overwhelmed. The very tactics that had doomed Earth's first line of defense, orbital strikes, planetary invasions, sabotage, had been used against the Vorkari. And humanity had done it faster. Better. Mercilessly. Zyral staggered back, his claws scraping against the floor. This was not how war was supposed to go. The transmission feed flickered. A new message. A human face appeared on the cracked screen. Zyral recognized him, the same military leader who had sent the warning at the beginning of the invasion. Back then, his expression had been one of defiance. Now, it was vengeance. You came here to wipe us out, the human said, voice calm, but edged with something colder than hatred. You thought we would break. That we would kneel. That we would die quietly. He leaned forward. But you never asked what happens when we win. The screen cut out. Zyrol stood frozen as the alarms began wailing. Human ships were moving in, boarding pods slamming into the Dominance's hull. Vorkari officers scrambled in panic, weapons raised. But Zyrol already knew. It was too late. The hunters had become the hunted. And humanity did not forgive.